This week's show brought to you by C2E2. If you are in the Chicago area, you should definitely go. Oh, we're on. You didn't do the 3, 2, 1 or anything. All right. This is Boxscore Geeks podcast. I'm your host, Dre Alvarez, a.k.a. Nerd Numbers, being unprofessional as always. And as I noted, Brian Foster, the producer of this show, who normally tells me when we're about to be on, normally I think he does like on in 3, 2, 1, just said you're on. And so obviously instead of being professional, I froze. Brian, you can find on Twitter's Boxscore Brian. Say hey.
Hey, what's up, Dre? And yeah, sometimes, with those long intros, I just have to do it. There's no time to say anything more.
I did get Mike Hoggy there about E2, and we're not even going to talk that much about it, so whatever. All right, so we got a few things to discuss this week. The end of the regular season, we discussed the Boxscore Geeks portfolio, which you may have noticed evaporated in a mist of busyness on the part of the editors of this show, as well as, kind of just, apathy over the fact of how bad it was doing. And though there was some late season luck, because we'll discuss this more about, how you should view money that you gamble or invest, et cetera. So we'll talk about how we actually made some money, even though we can say we lost some money. We're going to talk that. Definitely the playoffs have started. I'm going to be keeping my eye on the Milwaukee Bucks versus Toronto Raptors. Nothing personal. I'm not actually rooting for the Bucks, even though, man, they're keeping it close. I'm actually rooting for the Raptors, so we'll see how that goes. Then we're going to just talk a few other random things from around the interwebs that we always find interesting in the realm of advanced stats, and that'll be our show. All right, so Brian, let's hop into the portfolio. As I noted, every year, or at least 3 out of the last 4 years, the Boxscore Geeks has been running. Patrick's gone down to Vegas, put his money where his mouth is, put some bets on the regular season in terms of what we think to start the season. Let me see how we do. And this is actually one of the more popular kind of articles and things that has happened. One piece of credit I will give to Patrick compared to the standard article of this format is he actually goes to Vegas and puts the bets down. As an example, Patrick currently, this is like his last best hope to be close to even. Patrick put 2 bets against the Golden State Warriors to win the NBA Finals. And if both of those happen, he wins like $800, and that means he's down like $300 on his overall bet, which is about $4,000. We'll get into that. And there's an article we'll link that shows all of Patrick's bets, how well they did, how bad they did, etc. When I see a lot of these articles come out that say our numbers beat Vegas, what they do is they take a snapshot of some Vegas lines at a given day that they made their predictions and how well they would have done had they invested in it. And this isn't true. Las Vegas is essentially like the stock market, where the price isn't set necessarily because Las Vegas bookmakers think, for instance, that the Milwaukee Bucks will win 50 games. They set it at 50 because they want people to bet action on both sides. In fact, the ideal world for Las Vegas is $10,000 of wagers are placed against whatever they set the line at, $10,000 against, on both sides are placed, and they just collect basically the fees. That's the ideal world. In some cases, the money is lopsided. More people place one side versus the other. And then if they set the line wrong, they lose money. And that's, for instance, what happened when the New England Patriots lost the Super Bowl when they were an undefeated team. They got hurt because there was more money on the wrong side. Not enough people put a bet on New England winning it because they didn't set the line enough for enough people to actually bet on the favorite winning. It was more appealing to bet against it. And for those of you that have never put like a bet on an over-under or a game, usually there are some form of odds, plus or minus whatever. And in the game cases, it's just over-under. So Patrick went and put a bunch of bets on over-under, teams winning the divisions, the Warriors winning the finals or not, and basically took a bath. But the good news is, at one point, the logical outcome of the season, I think when Patrick checked in last on the portfolio, like I said, this used to be more of a regular thing, but when you're doing really, really bad, it's fine to just throw your hands up in the air, say sunk cost, and leave it be. But the last time he checked, he was doing a lot worse because a lot of things happened to end the season. The Warriors, despite being Kevin Durant-less, go on this amazing run, and then as Patrick noted in the article, they leave Kevin Durant in part to get his reps back up for the playoffs. So they've already got the number 1 seed locked up. They don't really have anything to play for, but they got to get Kevin Durant back in game shape before the playoffs, so they give him more minutes than he needs. The Lakers, who look terrible, end up winning inexplicably for whatever reason. Everybody's talking about tank mode. I'm on the Lakers side for this, and oh, there's another link I'll throw out maybe later about the Lakers, Brian. If I forget, let me know. And the Lakers win games they don't need to. Memphis manages to start sucking, so it's a push. So what a push means here is Patrick doesn't win his bet, but he doesn't lose his bet. He just gets his money back. So a bunch of stuff happened so that Patrick actually, at one point, he was like going to win $1,000 on like a $4,000 bet, which you may notice as a $3,000 loss. But he actually ends up currently, even if the Warriors go on and win the finals, Brian, he basically picked up $1,700 based on some inexplicable things happening to end the season. So that's kind of cool. And we wanted to kind of talk some of Patrick's takes on betting the full season. My kind of take, by the way, just is it is really, really, really hard to predict the NBA season because there are so many moving parts. And the NBA, I've noted this is a really weird concept to get your head around because I often say the NBA is the most predictable sport, but it's still unpredictable. And the reason for that is the NBA is where a couple players really, really matter. LeBron James is the reason the Cavaliers have made the finals 2 seasons in a row, possibly 3. Great players pretty much dictate where teams go, which means, though, an injury to that player, an off year by that player, a trade for that player against can really, really muck things up. And so, as I noted, I never got around to doing this, Brian, but if I went month by month on the portfolio, the closer to the start of the season, the more smart Patrick looks, and the further away from it, the less smart. But, a bunch of stuff happened. As I noted, bullshit at the start of the regular season. If anybody really thought Russell Westbrook playing, 34 and a half minutes a game was going to break the all-time record for triple-doubles. I'm not talking averaging a triple-double. I'm talking triple-doubles in a season. Over 50% of his games were triple-doubles. That is remarkable. BS if you really, really, really believed this kind of progression from the Rockets. Although, as I noted, it's an interesting game in prediction, Brian, because the responsible thing to do is to say where you were right, where you were wrong, kind of say stuff's hard. But what a lot of predictors do is they see, I told you, see, I told you. So I will do that with us. Andrew Sett in the beginning of the season said, man, Houston looks great in the preseason. I think they're going to be great with D'Antoni, and they were. But it's really hard to predict everything as we go through the season. And that's all I wanted to note is after doing this a couple years myself, my take was, I don't even know. I don't know. This is hard. I've done enough stuff trying to predict the next day, the next week of NBA play that I just realized trying to predict a full season is kind of folly. And even the articles that kind of try and trumpet how good they are at this don't do it right because, it's kind of like saying, yeah, I would have bought Apple stock at $10 a share. Well, it's just, people say if you'd invested $1,000 in Apple stock at this much a share, it'd be worth this much now. That's true. But anytime there is you start buying a stock, you change the price of the stock. The same happens anytime you make a bet. So if I release my preseason ratings, then go to Vegas and try and bet on them, guess what? That means those ratings are out in the ether. That means other people are making bets based on that. That means I probably don't get the price that I quote in my article. So like I said, that's the one bit of credit I give to Patrick is at the very least, he actually used real money, not, kind of the imaginary money that a lot of these articles do. And even if that's the case, I kind of just go, it's really hard to be good at this. That's kind of my take.
Yeah, it's really hard to be good at it. And, it's funny. We did hit a lot and we did miss a lot. But okay, here's one thing. So we always say, well, we're kind of the outsiders, right? We're going to disagree with the mainstream on a lot of things. We're going to disagree with mainstream analytics on a lot of things. We like to talk about that a lot. But even where we agree with all those different people, everyone is still wrong sometimes. Charlotte is a great example of that. Everyone and their mother knew before the season that this Charlotte over was the most sure bet ever. I thought so. Arturo thought so. I think you and Patrick and Andrew did as well. But it just didn't get there, right?
It seems, and to throw this one out, and you're going to show like a tool that I think it's over a year since I built it, Brian. I was going to improve it and release it. And that never happened. Have a kid. It's fun. But what we're going to notice, last season, they finished the season 48-34. And for, F's sake, was it Justice Winslow is coming back? They've got they've got these young players that look great. Even if Frank Kaminsky sucks, at the bare minimum, he's going to improve. That was one of our biggest downfalls in the portfolio this season, Brian, is we looked at these bad young players and we said they're bad and we're not expecting greatness out of them, but they can't be this bad next season. And a bunch of them, right? Frank Kaminsky, Frank Kaminsky was one, Andrew Wiggins was another. They were like, yeah, I can. So it's really hard to know if young players. Brad Beal was the inverse that Patrick brings up in the article on the Wizards. The Wizards hurt us, and a big part was Brad Beal went from being a terrible player to let's not give him credit. He's still not worth the damn contract he signed, but he went from being a terrible player to being an average player, and that's huge. So it's really really hard to predict when you have these 2-3 year players, right? You're going, they should have progression. That's what happens, right? There's the age curve, there's the learning curve. They should get better. But the reality is, and Patrick put this very astute point in his article, when you're making bets based on the progression or degradation of aging players, you just have to kind of accept its high volatility. And so, yeah, the Hornets did that to us with Frank Kaminsky. Obviously, Marvin Williams regressed a little, but you might have expected that, and that was kind of made up by other players. But essentially, Frank Kaminsky and Kemba Walker played worse than we would have expected given their age. What are you going to do? Then on the flip side, on the Timberwolves, Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins didn't have the jump we would expect. To be fair, I'll give the Timberwolves bet one thing. Patrick did note that he didn't really like it, but he just got baited into it based on seeing how well Karl Anthony Towns was playing, and there you go. And to be fair, when you say mainstream analytics, I agree. I seem to recall everybody and their mother being excited about how great this Timberwolves team was going to be this season, right? At least they're going to be, they're finally at least going to make the playoffs with the most astounding rookie player, Karl Anthony Towns after that amazing Rookie of the Year season. They just got to get a little better, right? That's got to happen, and then nope. So there you go.
Yeah, and the sad thing about that is we like Ricky Rubio way more than the mainstream does, and he was relatively healthy this year and played pretty well. It didn't matter; it just wasn't enough.
Well, he was injured a lot, and then other players didn't progress as much as we would expect.
Sorry, relatively healthy for Ricky Rubio, maybe not for a regular NBA player. You're right, though. But we've got the Wizards up right now, and they kind of had the opposite thing happen. So Otto Porter and Bradley Beal. I guess Bradley Beal's not that young anymore. He's probably 25 or older, maybe not. We'll have to look that up. But Porter and Beal just took big steps up this year, and so did Oubre, if that's being pronounced right. I'm not 100% sure. Kelly is his first name. Even with Markieff Morris weighing them down tremendously, all their young players really pushed them forward this season.
Now, another important aspect I want to bring up about trying to make over-under bets. And so, for instance, let's say you made the over bet on Boston and feel really smart right now, and we feel painful. That went into the last game of the season, and Patrick's second point is that injuries and rest make over bets really scary. And his point is very well made there, because something that happened this season, right, is that it's funny that the two played off each other. The Cleveland Cavaliers were arguably more dinged up by a significant margin than they were last season, and wisely so. They got a lot more rest, right? And they kind of did. I'll actually give credit to this. They did wise rest. What they kind of did is they said, we accept that LeBron James, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Love are our engine, and so it doesn't really do us a lot of good to play a couple of them in and one of them out. So they had a lot of games where it seemed pretty obvious that as soon as LeBron James decided he was resting, they just said, we're just going to shut down our core, let our starters rest, and they're going to play together. Which I can't actually. We already had the big discussion. We'll have to see what the NBA does in the offseason, but we already had the discussion about how that's not necessarily a bad strategy for teams to win, but it gets interesting when the NBA wants to make money on things like televised games. But to Patrick's point, it gets really hard to judge a big over when a team is really good because of things like injury and rest, because teams will willingly rest players because they realize, hey, it's more important I do well in the playoffs. As we noted, we got lucky to get that Warriors bet. Because under normal circumstances, if Kevin Durant was healthy the whole season, they already had the number 1 seed locked up, I think, with about 5 games to go. Does that sound right, Brian?
Yes, that's let's see. Roughly. Yes, roughly.
I think the Warriors, Spurs, and Rockets had 1 through 3 locked up with about a week to go. I know that the Clippers and the Jazz were still fighting over 4 and 5 for a bit, and then basically it was just the Nuggets and Portland jostling for 8.
Well, let's put it this way. On last week's show, we said that's almost going to happen for sure. So we were, it was pretty much locked in.
Yeah, and so, but to that point, teams decide rest based on, Are they still in the playoff race? The Nuggets were still fighting for a playoff spot up till a week to go. There were other teams that knew they were out of the playoffs. There are teams that go, oh, okay, a bet we made, for instance, was this would have saved the portfolio on its own. Ironically, if it had happened and we came damn close because they won 55 games, they just happened to be in the same stupid division as the Spurs. But the Rockets, it's obvious really quickly. Oh, we're not going to do better than the number 3 seed, so we don't need to push it. And so when you're trying to guess an over/under on a thin margin, it gets really, really rough because you're not going to know how an injury to a star player, how the playoff scene is going to play out. And by the way, I have no complaints if the takeaway you're taking from this is me going, we've done this for 4 years. I've seen us muck it up with very advanced models by very smart people. I've seen us muck it up with back of the napkin models. My personal takeaway is it is just really, really hard to do. And a lot of the models that I see that say, oh, we beat Vegas, I just kind of shrug my shoulders and go, I can't even really grade your over/under if you don't tell me your assumptions. Because without knowing your assumptions ahead of time, a lot of that's luck. And in some cases, I go bullshit. Like if you bet that the Memphis Grizzlies were going to win 43 games this season, and we obviously thought they were going to be less by a significant margin, well, if you don't tell me ahead of time that you don't think JaMychal Green's going to be above average, and not only that, have a breakout season and have some clutch games, or that Vince Carter is just going to ignore the fact that he's a billion years old. Vince Carter is the oldest player in the NBA, 40 years old, played over 30 minutes in a playoff game the other night, Brian. I cannot believe that player. That is just so ridiculous. So, if you don't tell me ahead of time and then just say, this is why we thought it would happen, which, by the way, back in the day when we used to do this the first couple times, we did that. And after looking, I went, oh, okay, there are too many moving parts. We put all this work into these very carefully crafted, intricate projections for each team and even put error bars around them. I said, oh, it's crap. It just takes one little tweak to one player. Instead of having your starter play 500 minutes, you have this backup, and this backup is terrible. That can completely change the direct trajectory of a team. And then, as we know, this is very butterfly effect. If a team that was supposed to win the division doesn't, which means there's a power vacuum for the division, now other teams that weren't going to be trying with 10 games to go are trying, which now means that teams that were going to have easier games to end out the season have harder games. It is just, I have no complaint saying this. This is why we watch sports. If at the beginning of the season, people were really as good at predicting this as they said they were, no one would watch. And by the way, I think I noted a few years back, like, people, the metric that a guy named is like basketball analytics. It's Vilku is the guy's like pseudonym, and then I forget the site, whatever, because he hasn't written for a while. He noted the standard error around people's projections, and I basically said that's like a 15-game margin for every team. So it's not really a great projection if you say my bets win because all I needed was a radius of 15 games around the team to know how well each team was going to do. That doesn't mean anything because that's the difference between a number 1 seed in your division, not necessarily, the freaking Warriors wreck the curve, Brian, thanks a lot. But that's the difference between a number 1 seed in your division and fighting for like a top 10 lottery pick. That doesn't mean anything to me.
Yeah, that's right. And, you can look at trends and say, oh, this is probably going to happen. But, we were talking about this in the pre-show. So I've got the this what if engine for Memphis up on the screen right now. And they did improve this season. And, okay, so here's 2 big points from looking at this data in front of us right now. The first is that really bad players being in rotation, that is just really an underrated thing, and that matters a lot. Getting rid of Jeff Green was a huge thing for them, according to these numbers, right? He was just a really bad player. He was playing almost 20 minutes per game for them, and that was, outweighing the positive production of some of their good players. So that was key. Again, you're talking about the Warriors. Getting rid of Spates, same thing for them, right? Just so big. It's worth almost having a star to get rid of a really bad player. Second thing is, look at all these players that improved here. Mike Conley improved this year from last year. Marc Gasol, Vince Carter, Tony Allen, they all played better, and they're all in their 30s, except for Carter, like you said, who's actually in his 40s. So, that's not out of the realm of possibility. Maybe old players can play better next season than the one before. It's just not what you'd expect. So it's just
no one logically a bet on, as you noted, like no one would, you might have a couple players that improve, but yeah, I would not bet Mike Conley coming back from Achilles injury getting better. Definitely wouldn't. The biggest ones, losing Jeff Green really helped, which, that's a shame. And then I think that really helped too, because I think they played better. I think even just giving Zach Randolph and Marc Gasol a few more minutes is going to help out there. Like Marc Gasol got more minutes and still wasn't above average by our numbers, but Marc Gasol coming back from being injured and banged up to being close to average as opposed to horrible like he was last season. That's huge. It's like, yeah, you're not going to project that a bunch of old injured players are all, not only they're all going to come back. So you said, see if I get them again, Mike Conley, Marc Gasol, Vince Carter, and
Tony Allen all played better this year than last year.
You wouldn't project that. And then they also had just a bunch of chippy stuff, like a bunch of random players that just kind of chippy did better, which was definitely helpful. So yeah, that's really hard to project and predict. And, that's why it gets really hard to grade anybody's projection, because there's a really famous quote that I have to write an article about at some point. I think it was by Babbage, one of the first people that created a computer. I'm not 100% sure, so I may be misattributing this quote. We can try and look it up. But he was giving a talk about a computing device. Like, it's funny, like pre-computers, right? There were lectures about theoretical computers where they would explain, you have this device that takes these inputs and then it does all these calculations and gives you an output. Think of like Batman, the 1960s Batman, how that machine worked. If that even landed with anybody, it's out on DVD at the very least, so you can look it up if you want to. But that's how people used to talk about it. And someone at a lecture said, if I put the wrong inputs into your machine, can it give me the correct output? And he was like, and he talked about it. He was like, I was baffled because I didn't know how to answer that question. It's meaningless. But to that point, I can put a bunch of wrong analytical input into a model, spit out a number for over under, use that number and be correct, and I'm right for the wrong reasons. So that's
exactly.
That's what makes it really hard. Is someone can say, I thought what was going to happen is that Marc Gasol was going to play MVP level this season. We can go, that didn't happen, but you thinking that happened is why you bet the over. So is what it is. All right. Anything else on the portfolio you want to talk? We just at least got to give a shout out. We do have to give a major shout out to Brooklyn, who did not own their lottery pick, so had no incentive to tank. Picked up Jeremy Lin, so they at least had a decent player. Hats off to you playing this horribly without a draft pick, Brooklyn. Just, inadvertent shout out. I cannot believe a team without a draft pick played this horribly. And as Patrick noted, Vegas may be getting savvier because we've taken the over on terrible teams that was our 76ers line. They're bad, but they're not that bad. And he's saying Vegas is getting savvier. Like, yeah, you're right. It's really hard to be a 16-win team, so we're going to put it at 25.
Now, that roster, boy, they have some problems. And I even read an article that maybe Prokhorov may not be as gung-ho as he used to be, that he may want to sell part of his ownership stake. So, I don't blame him. Like, it's not a great roster right now.
Well, the annoying part about the NBA as compared to soccer, and it seemed like he had a very soccer mentality, right? As he came in, he bought these alleged stars, Kevin Garnett,
right,
and Pierce. And in the soccer world, right, I don't necessarily think it's actually that bad in terms of competitive balance because they have relegation and stuff. But in soccer, you have these expensive teams that can come and just buy the best players. And even baseball, we have that mentality. Now, we can make lots of arguments about why that's bad theory or why it doesn't really win. And I'm assuming baseball and soccer both have the issue that what wins games isn't as consistent year to year as you would like. So just because you buy, I just dropped. There's a really good baseball player for the Tigers, but he's really old. Manny Ramirez. Just because you buy Manny Ramirez doesn't mean you're going to win because he could have an off year. But basketball is a little different where you come in and you spend a bunch of money and you can't just win, right? Because there are players like LeBron James, like Kevin Durant, that are just locked up and you have no shot at them. And in soccer, it's not the case. Soccer and baseball, it is a lot easier to buy a player than it is in basketball, which is interesting for all we've said about basketball's issues. It makes you feel a little skittish saying it in those terms, Brian. But yeah, so it might be that he came in gung-ho with like a soccer mentality, and it's like, oh, this is a different game. And he's not good at it. Like, it's the Vivek Rod problem, right? You've got these smart people, allegedly smart people, that come in and try and play a game. They don't really know the rules. And, we'll talk about this more in our last point, but just because you are smart and just because you are skilled at something does not mean you are skilled at everything. I really hate this TV trope about this, right? About the expert at one thing that just picks up everything else easily. That's not how the real world works. It takes lots of time and effort to get mastery and skill at something. And just because you've done that doesn't mean you get it everywhere. And I love sports for this because we see lots of smart people that have made billions elsewhere Probably due to luck, a lot of it, but still maybe some smartness. And they come in and they can't run a sports team where the rules are much more in their favor and much clearer. So
I will say, to the Brooklyn Nets' credit, they did improve this season from last. They went from negative 7.4 points over par to negative 6.8. So they did improve, and they got rid of some guys like Joe Johnson and Bargnani. So they're on the right track. You know what it looks like where they are to me, Dre, right now is kind of the very beginning of the process, right? They've gotten rid of some of their bad contracts, but yet they have not started bringing in good young players yet. So, yeah, not a great place to be in.
all right, so let's do the haiku version of the playoffs. That's what I called it. So there are obviously 8 series in effect. We have a couple that we want to give a little more time to, but let's go over them quickly. Very first one, Golden State versus Portland. That was scary for a minute there, Brian. I was watching the game. I'll say my classic playoff note, like CJ McCollum was shooting amazingly. I think Arturo noted that too. Like Portland was making circus shots and the game was still close. Golden State pulled away. Anything can happen in the playoffs, but typically we kind of just note this. When a team has to put up absurd numbers to keep it close, it's very hard to believe that they'll come back and win. Not saying Portland can't, not saying that like Aminu can't remember he's a good player. But Golden State, I want to stress this. By the numbers, Golden State is a better team than they were last season. That is with Kevin Durant being injured for 20 games, and that is with Steph Curry starting the season pretty weak. So this team is scary. It's the same kind of mantra as last year. This team just needs to stay healthy in the playoffs. So we'd be surprised by an upset. But if a circus shot game, excuse me, out of Portland isn't enough to win it, I'm just, I'm not sad being less confident in that.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find Arturo's predictions right now, but he's such a beast on Twitter that it's been pushed all the way back on the timeline, even though it's only been a few days. So, but I can't show it right now, but I think he had Golden State at 100% chance of winning. And, let's say Curry and Durant get hurt,
Sorry, that is just not.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at is there could still be injuries in this series, and that could mean that the Warriors lose. In fact, Portland won a series last year when that same thing happened, right? They were behind to the Clippers and ended up winning the series because Chris Paul got hurt and I think other players as well.
Chris Paul and Blake Griffin's playing out. Like he's done this. Blake Griffin, he just makes me so sad because 2 playoff seasons in a row, I was like, this guy's like Larry Bird-like. And by the way, just the note we give on young players, Blake Griffin was a top prospect that was injured a full season of his rookie contract, that has looked beat up since, that's had attitude issues off the court. Even when you have, I'll put in quotes, the sure thing, like the can't miss number one prospect, there's no guarantee that they stay healthy and on the court. So just want to throw that out because even if we might talk about how we love Lonzo Ball in the upcoming NBA draft.
Oh yeah.
There's nothing to guarantee that he's not going to, tweak his ankle in the first week of training camp and then just never be the same player.
Yeah, that's right. That's what we always say, because that's what happened to Greg Oden and, Sam Bowie and maybe even Ralph Sampson to some extent. Players that look great in college, looked great going to the NBA, but just were hurt and didn't get done. But I bring up Arturo's predictions not to, poke holes in it, but to agree with him and say that, well, maybe if they even aren't 100%, if that's a little too high, it's, emphasizes how crushingly good this team is. And, watching that first game, I felt the same way as what you were talking about. Portland was just making every shot, and I was thinking they just can't do any better than this, really. So that's a bad sign for them. An even worse sign for Portland, actually, is their injuries. Ed Davis, of course, is out for the season. He didn't play very well this year compared to what he's used to. But considering he has been such a good player in the past, who knows? Maybe he could have risen up and return to his old form.
That was actually an issue last playoffs, if you recall, because we were analyzing Golden State versus Portland last year. Portland kept this closer than they should have, we argued. And, what they kind of did is they stopped playing Ed Davis, and we kind of said, that's one of your edges, and you're giving it up.
So they're starting Vonleh, who's never been good. They're starting small lineups, and that's what we always like to say is, I don't necessarily think that small ball is the best thing for the Warriors all the time, especially when you're going against teams like Oklahoma City, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Spurs, teams with 2 legit big men that can punish you on the boards. but going small ball when the Warriors are small ball against them, that's always a bad idea, and the Warriors are always going to win that. So
It's a weird. Okay, let's hop into our next series because we want to talk.
yeah, not a very close series, I don't think.
Okay, so the Los Angeles Clippers versus Utah. First off, we got to apologize for the Boxscore Geeks curse when we give our vote of approval for an of the year award. It seems like it kind of means the player gets injured. It usually happens with rookies of the year. We're like Jabari Parker, rookie of the year. Nope. I believe. How am I dropping his name? He was on the Brooklyn Nets last season. I forgot. But we've done that a few seasons. I think it was like Kilpatrick or something. But we've done that a few years where we've given our stamp of approval on a rookie and then they get injured immediately after. That being said, Gobert's out at least for the next game, and it's a pretty major injury. I think the last time it happened to him, it kept him out 5 weeks. I'm really bummed because I was really high on Utah taking this series. The Clippers have slightly better numbers and a really good rotation, but Utah has at home. And then, I think Gobert and Gordon Hayward, if they get major minutes, are beasts. But, obviously Gobert is now out injured for Utah. But inexplicably, Utah still took the first game very closely. And the reason I wanted to bring up game theory is I agree with you that Golden State Warriors playing small is a bad idea. Especially, I like JaVale McGee. I don't care that people think he's quirky and whatever. His numbers say he's great. He doesn't need to shoot the ball on that team. I think Andrew Bogut helped. I think there have been arguments, despite the fact that we say Andrew Bogut's numbers on the court said he was great. Patrick wrote an article a few years back that said like the Warriors' jump in production. People were rightly noting players like Draymond Green and Steph Curry, but they were ignoring that Andrew Bogut was putting up star-level numbers, just doing the small things. And so I've heard arguments that, Andrew Bogut for offensive sets, for pick and rolls, et cetera, was more helpful than a small ball player or even a center like Zaza Pachulia. So I love JaVale McGee, but when the Warriors play small, sometimes they bait the opponent into playing small. And as you kind of noted, you can't really beat the Warriors that way because you can't really beat Draymond Green and Kevin Durant as the Warriors out of position small players compared to another teams. So if the other team is willing to do, this happened last season with Oklahoma City Thunder. If Oklahoma City says, screw you, we're just going to play Cantor and Adams and rough you up at the boards, that can possibly win. But most teams fall for the trap of saying Golden State's playing small, we should play small too. Ironic story, that's what happened to the Nuggets back in the day when David Lee got injured. They decided to go small. I don't recall if JaVale McGee was actually healthy enough to play, but yeah, we rested some of our bigs and ended up getting upset by the Warriors right before they took off. So the Clippers, Utah, the reason I bring that up is there's a weird game theory thing that happened. Doc Rivers decided with 18 seconds left in the game, they're down by 2. He just has Chris Paul go for an easy shot. Chris Paul makes a 6-foot shot to tie the game up, but there's lots of time left on the clock. And then Utah decides to just come back really quickly and score as well. And the Clippers, they decide not to call a timeout. Sorry. Come back, score, and they lose. And the reason this was rough is the Clippers had subbed in. They'd subbed out Man, I am messing names up all over the place. Let me get recalibrated real quick. The Clippers had subbed out DeAndre Jordan and Luke Mbah-a-Moute for 2 offensive players. I believe it was Redick and Crawford, to try and get, the classic late game shot. You want as many 3-point shooters on the court as possible to try and get an open shot. They did get a shot to tie up the game, but then Utah doesn't call a timeout with time left. Utah comes back. The Clippers don't have their defensive-minded players on the court. Utah manages to score and win. And after the game, Doc Rivers got asked about it. He said, should you have worn down the clock instead of trying to score quickly? And Doc Rivers got really incredulous. You laugh because he called it the dumbest thing he's ever heard. And to his credit, I don't agree with this writer in trying to phrase. I don't agree with the interviewer, the person who asked the question, just because he brings up Kobe Bryant as like Kobe Bryant would have worn out the clock. I linked another article, Brian, that Henry Abbott, some of Henry Abbott's best work that no one ever listened to. But Kobe Bryant was not a clutch shooter. Kobe Bryant was horrible in the clutch. So if you were going to ask what you should do in clutch time, the answer is don't ask Kobe Bryant. So I actually agree full-heartedly with Doc Rivers doing what he did. The mistake Doc Rivers made is not assuming that the opposing coach would do the same strategy. Say, instead of calling a timeout and resetting the game, the coach just kept the game going. Instead of trying to wear out the clock, the Utah coach, I don't remember his name, apologies, just decided to try and go for the score as well. And because of that, Doc Rivers was out of position. So in terms of this article, it's funny because I'm on Doc Rivers' side. He made the right call, but he got out coached and not assuming that the opposing coach would do the same kind of thing, which is to say, in late game scenarios, the right strategy is not to call timeout to reset everything and wear out the clock. The right strategy is just to try and score.
Yeah, that's right. And so there's a few things about this. First of all, I agree with pretty much everything you said. And this article here is from Basketball Insiders by Eric Pincus. I'm not familiar with him that much, but everyone on Twitter hates him apparently, and this article helped it out. So sorry, Eric Pincus, I don't know you, but we're linking your article. And I don't agree with his article at all. So
he calls Jamal Crawford one of the best six men in NBA history.
Yeah.
That is, when you've got Manu Ginobili and, wow, I just dropped his name. Help me out. I'm not going to let us go until I get it. Played for the Lakers, helped them to 2 titles.
Magic Johnson, James Worthy,
Lamar,
Shaq. Lamar Odom. Yeah, he was great.
Jeez. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for the help there.
I'm just naming Lakers. So,
but yeah.
All I was going to say is my big problem with this article is the sort of running with a narrative based on small things. So here's what I mean by that. If this game is a tie game at the very end or whatever it is, a 2-point game, I mean, the game is going to be like a 50-50 game is what if you had to place a bet, right? The teams are probably equally matched because they're a 4 and 5 seed. Whatever players they have in the game.
I give it to the Clippers have the edge if it goes to OT just because without Gobert. Like I think I will be really interested to see what Utah does.
Well, sure, but just one point before we go down on that is so Pincus kind of draws all these conclusions. So Rivers makes move X, then Y, then move Y, then what move Z. Therefore, all these things happened. Therefore, he's a bad coach and made these bad plays. I just think most of what happened is out of the coach's control. All the calling a timeout or not, which players you have in the game, those are going to move those percentages maybe one way or the other. But I think I don't think you can just say it's all on Doc Rivers for good or bad. It's really just kind of a crapshoot when the game is tied at the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. And I think that's important. I like Eric Pincus a lot as a person, but yeah, I think the.
Oh, okay, great. I'll read him some more then.
But the annoying part. This is why I don't read. It's a funny thing. I bring up the Short Corner podcast, was one of my faves all the time. An interesting point they made on that show is how hard it was to have NBA players as guests on the show. They didn't really want to do that. The players they talked to were like Steve Nash and Pau Gasol, kind of older players. I think they were assuming Pau Gasol was close to retirement. Who knew? But it's really hard to talk crap about people or players and then try and have them on your show and be cordial. And that's one of the issues I have with a lot of mainstream media at this point, or mainstream sports media, is a lot of these people seem like perfectly nice people, and I like them, and I've met some of them in person. I've met a lot of the Basketball Insiders people the times I've gone to Sloan, but I'm not going to agree with their takes on basketball a lot. And it gets interesting how that puts you at ends where insulting someone's ideas does not mean you are insulting a person. When I say you have no idea what you're talking about the statistics of basketball, I am not telling you that you are a bad person. I'm just saying you're not doing the math right. So it gets hard to your point. This article, I didn't agree with pretty much any of it, to your point, on the narrative street. Doesn't mean the writer's a bad person. That's always been the issue with stats versus person. I'm trying to think. Let's keep going down the playoffs. The East is just shocking me right now with how it's going because
actually, Trey, I've got one more thing on the Clippers before we move on from that. Actually, so Doc Rivers said one other thing recently, and let's bring up here this ESPN article. I guess I don't have the link, but here he said basically, I'm going to try to keep this team together. That's what he said. So Doc Rivers, the coach, will give you some credit, even if you messed up a little bit for coaching this last game. But Doc Rivers, the GM, oh boy, that's been rough for Clipper fans. So we have two Hall of Fame caliber players here. I think Chris Paul is 100% Hall of Fame at this point. Even if he just retired today, he'd have my vote. I don't think
if Tracy McGrady made first ballot, there's no way Chris Paul's body of work up to this point does not also merit
one of the
ballot.
Best point guards of all time. Just such a great player. Only injuries and being on bad teams has really held him back. DeAndre Jordan, younger, maybe hasn't put up enough years yet to be a Hall of Famer, but he's putting up MVP caliber seasons
He's
over and over again.
Boxscore Geeks Hall of Famer. We that's actually an article on the back burner, Brian, which is like snubbed MVPs and or Hall of Famers. And obviously, two of them that I'll give you are Sid Moncrief and Mark Eaton. Both of these players won 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards. So
Yeah.
we're always on the side of those players that put up the numbers that don't get respect from mainstream like they should.
Just anyway, to finish this off, though, my point is if the 2 Hall of Fame players playing together for this many years, they should have multiple titles. But the roster around them is just so bereft of talent.
Well, maybe. I mean, I think it's rough because the Warriors. First, it's this very similar.
That's
to the Bulls.
fair. Being against the Warriors and Spurs is tough. Like Stockton Malone is the example we're using here, and they probably didn't win a title because of the Bulls.
But they got 2 shots at the finals, right? And they were very close. And you can throw it at Karl Malone, right? He missed some easy free throws in a game. It's it's very tragic. So yeah, I agree with you. Like this team has underperformed relative to what they should have. Even if they were going to not make the finals because they lost to Golden State, they should have been in Game 7s with Golden State or not Sacramento or San Antonio in the conference finals instead of falling out as early as they have. And I've mentioned before, it's things like signing Austin Rivers and signing Austin Rivers and Jamal Crawford, all of these.
Crawford, Mo Spates, we talked about being a big plus for leaving the Warriors, is now a minus for the Clippers. And if we want to compare them to the Warriors, let's look what the Warriors did in the offseason. Other than Kevin Durant, that's a no-brainer. We give them no credit for that, right? Sorry, we give them no analytics credit for it. We give them plenty of prestige credit for being able to lure him over. These are 2 different things we're talking about here. But they totally revamped their bench is what I'm trying to say. They improved them in almost every way, and that's why they're a better team this year than they were last year, even though they won less games. Clippers just, okay, maybe they did try to improve it, but they didn't. They just fell short. They brought in the wrong players. So, yeah, they should be trying to improve their bench and their role players. And Doc, maybe he's just saying that to try to make his players feel good. And if that's true, then I'll give him credit because that's a smart thing to say. But if he really does believe that he's got a roster good enough to compete with the Warriors and the Spurs, he's just wrong, and he's wasting his star's best years.
All right, so let's try and run through. The reason I chuckled a second ago is I was like, let's do haiku for, and we've given a lot of time to 2 series. Okay.
Well, so that was the most interesting series, I think, by far.
Houston versus OKC. I'm happy to see a blowout initially. That amused me and tickled me pink. Who knows? It's just one game. I'll say that. That's the important thing to remember. Don't overreact to blowouts in the playoffs. A loss by 1 point versus a loss by 100 point. Both count. So I'm really excited to see where that goes. Obviously, who's the player? Patrick Beverley. He was also, by the way, one of the dark horses. So the 3 main players we credit with the Rockets turnaround this season are Harden, who went from playing great to playing MVP level again. Like he's got MVP mode apparently. Trevor Ariza, who had an off year last year and had a good year this year, and Patrick Beverley, who stepped up. And like we mentioned, maybe it's Mike D'Antoni's offense. But those 3 players really did a lot, and Patrick Beverley had a great game 1. So looking forward to that. I'm hoping there's a little more fight in this series because this is one of the ones I was looking forward to the most. So I really hope it's just not a blowout and lopsided, but, fun start.
One question, Dre, I don't know about the series. Is Clint Capella healthy and playing right now? I believe he is. Do you know one way or the other?
I don't know. I'll try and look that up. And
just other thing about the Rockets is they lost Dwight Howard, right? Who's a great player, but they were able to replace a lot of his minutes by giving Capella more minutes, who's also a good player. That dulled the impact a little bit.
Yeah, that was. I mean, the other thing too is if you're a team that doesn't want to play Twin Towers, which they definitely should. Oh, and by the way, Clint Capella played that first game, shot 7 for 9, pulled down 7 boards, 2 assists, a steal, 2. That's like a box score of the week right
great
there.
Play.
He did that in 25 minutes of play. That's why he only played 25 minutes because they won by 31. But what I was going to note, I completely lost my train of thought. I apologize.
Sorry, Dre.
The Spurs versus Memphis. So I was saying, don't overact to one blowout, but the Spurs are beating up on Memphis. Memphis tried to make game 2 close, but it got away from them. Kawhi is just playing freaking amazing. So what I'll say is if you're in a 2-0 hole, you're not in a good spot, especially if you've been getting beat up. So here, I'm going to try and tie 2 together. The Spurs looking great, exactly what we expect. We said Memphis was old and beat up. They're playing. Vince Carter isn't playing MVP level anymore. Vince Carter, sure, playing 30 minutes in a playoff game is impressive, but he's not playing like he was playing at the start of the season. The Spurs look amazing, and Kawhi is great and looking like it. So there you go. They're in a 2-0 victory thing. Cleveland, though, versus Indiana. You shouldn't be excited about how Cleveland looks, although let's be fair. It is freaking remarkable how the East looks right now because all of these top-seeded teams are not putting up the fights I was hoping. I thought the top of the East should beat up the bottom of the East. Boston lost game one to Chicago and is down at the half. They're just going into the third, so they're down by 6 in the second half. Cleveland just barely eked out 2 wins against Indiana. Toronto is down 1-0 to Milwaukee. They're up by a marginal amount right now, so we'll see if they hold on. And then Washington's up by 1 to Atlanta. That's like the only one that is doing what it's supposed to is Washington versus Atlanta. And the only series I really want to talk about in those 4, because nothing really surprised me. Like I said, Cleveland, they better hope for a miracle if they're going to beat whatever team comes out of the West. The top of the West, Houston, Golden State, and San Antonio right now. Houston just wiped the floor with OKC. San Antonio's beaten up on Memphis. Golden State let Portland have the Game Genie cheat code on and still beat them. So the top of the West is looking damn strong. Cleveland is not, as you noted, they finished the regular season, I think, in the bottom 10 in terms of defensive rating. They're getting a fight against Indiana. So they better really hope for something if they want to try and even make it to the finals again. Although they might luck out if if Boston and Toronto both go down, Cleveland could have an easy path to the finals. So we'll see what happens there. The Boston note, I want to reiterate a point we've made before, which is to say, apparently at the trade deadline, Boston had some moves. They could have gotten DeMarcus Cousins. Maybe they really should have gone for Jimmy Butler if there was a legit shot, apparently. Excuse me. But I just wanted to make a brief note about Boston and say we had an old quote that I had, which was players age like milk, which the Spurs just loved throwing in my face. Tim Duncan played great for like 5 years after I wrote that article, and he was one of my key points. But assets expire in the NBA. And Boston has the best shot it's had in years to make it to the finals, and I argue they wasted it. Assets expire in the NBA because their competitive value goes down. If you don't spend draft picks, if you don't send cap exceptions, then other teams catch up with you and you lose out. So if Boston had a real shot to make a move this trade deadline and didn't, they made a mistake because I looked at it. They're one of the weaker teams to win the division in a while. Although what I'll note is the East has done this before. The East has had teams like Indiana and Atlanta in the past that have won the division on a relatively weak strength of schedule adjusted point margin. And then those teams never make it to the finals. So I'm not really expecting Boston to even make it to the finals. I'm just saying if they had a shot to improve themselves marginally going into these playoffs, they made a mistake not doing it. Although to give a little bit of fair credit, someone on Twitter made this point to me. We don't know behind the scenes what happened. So it's entirely possible they wanted DeMarcus Cousins, had a trade in the works for him that included Terry Rozier, and the other team asked for something unreasonable. But the rumor mill is Boston could have had DeMarcus Cousins on their roster if they'd just been willing to give Terry Rozier, and they weren't willing to pull the trigger because of Terry Rozier. I hope I'm saying his name right. If not, I said it a lot of times.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, it's Rozier.
And so if that's the case, they really mucked up, especially since one of their big weaknesses is at the big position. Al Horford was a horrible signing. I've heard some arguments like they had to spend the cap because there's a big cap season. No, Al Horford was a mistake. I love Al Horford. I thought Al Horford was a great player in his prime. He's in his 30s now. He's undersized for a center. It was a mistake to sign Al Horford. Yeah. Boston possibly blew it.
Well, I've got a few immediate comments on that. First of all, if we pushed our under on the Celtics and they still got the number 1 seed, that's a really bad sign for the overall strength of the East this season, for one. Also, it's a pretty delicious coincidence that they're playing against Chicago, who has Jimmy Butler, the player they are rumored to be trading for. So
I don't know how true. I mean, my sincere hope is that Chicago and Jimmy Butler are feuding and the agent is spreading things out. Butler's not going to be here next season, yada, yada. And I'm hoping that if the Bulls, I'll give you a little backstory. I don't care about burning bridges. I don't even remember his name, so it doesn't matter. One of the Bulls analytics guys I met at Sloan a few years ago, and he walked up and kind of said, I don't really like Dave Barry's work. And I was kind of like, oh, okay, kind of makes sense. Your team sucks. But no, like I would really hope if the Bulls have anybody worth their salt in their analytics department, they would just go, unless you're getting Kevin Durant, you're not trading Jimmy Butler. I can't think of they're players. Kevin Durant's one of them. They're like players that I would call like a handful player, where you could interpret this two ways. There are only a handful of players like that, or conversely, there are only a handful of players I would like to trade them for. And I've never been a fan of trading, even if you only got 1 year left of them. I've never been a fan of trading stars for assets because in the NBA, assets almost invariably never end up being worth as much as a star. We're just going to go over today, Brian. I can already tell looking at the stopwatch I'm going. So what I was going to say is like a good example is Charles Barkley is one of the few trades that was actually for a star player and a good secondary player. And that still didn't work out because Jeff Hornacek, right, ended up just leaving in the offseason to go to Utah. And the other player was just an average player. You can place him anyway. You hardly ever get fair value back for stars. So I would hope if they have an analytics department, not impressed with the one I talked to 3 years ago. Maybe you've changed. Not impressed with the one that traded for Michael Carter-Williams, signed Dwayne Wade. What were you and Rajon Rondo? Like, who thought that was a good idea? So not impressed with what I've seen, but I would hope that even the most screwed up analytics department would realize you can't trade Jimmy Butler unless you're getting a great deal back. Like if you got like Jay Crowder and Isaiah Thomas and 2 draft picks, fine. But I sincerely doubt Boston had that on the table.
That's the only trade I can think of that's not a complete steal for the Celtics.
There are star trades that could be steals, but it usually requires the other team having an undervalued asset they don't realize is undervalued. And when we notice players like Hassan Whiteside and DeAndre Jordan getting max deals or getting the reserve clause matched, that's becoming less and less of the case in the NBA, in my opinion, which is a good thing. The only other last note I have on the playoffs, Brian, apparently Lance Stevenson was pulling a Reggie Miller, making some good shots, and started chalking trash to the Cleveland bench. And then they got beat. And then, I guess Paul George, who I think is overrated, way it goes, went up and said Lance Stevenson needs Thorne to calm down. I just thought that was ironic because if you remember Indiana lore, Indiana history, Reggie Miller is one of the most infamous trash talkers, went by the New York bench in the playoffs and made the choking symbol at Spike Lee. So it's kind of like, it's really just, it's the yay points thing. We talk about this a lot. If you're a scorer, and you do shit like this, people think it means you're clutch. If you're Kobe and you throw your teammates under the bench in press conferences, you're clutch. You have a will to win. If you're a role player, I put that in quotes. You can't see it because I'm not on camera. Like Lance Stevenson, a role player like Draymond Green, and you do stuff like this, you're a malcontent. So, is what it is. Classic NBA.
Now that's all I got on that series. Not very interesting to me, unfortunately.
All right. This is more of a shout out, but it's next on the script, so I'll just go there. So Matt Femright over at Nylon Calculus, we're doing good, Brian, because I think I bashed Nylon Calculus in the past. Justin Willard is not a fan of mine. Don't really give a damn. But there are good writers at Nylon Calculus, so I love when you and me find good articles that we like. And the reason you brought this up is we were kind of talking league-adjusted statistics. So when we were kind of talking players that are better at scoring this year than last year, but it doesn't matter because the league has gotten better on the whole at scoring. So, the NBA and sports in general is a place you have to grade on a curve. Matt Femright did a good article looking at Golden State statistics and comparing them to league average. So fantastic work. This is the kind of stuff we like. It's not new. I don't want to insult anybody, but in the world of sports analytics, a lot of the stories have been told over and over again. That's one reason I've talked to Dave Barry, and he's like, I don't feel like writing as much because the stories you're writing about Paul George or Carmelo Anthony or the Spurs are the stories he was writing about Allen Iverson, Carmelo Anthony, and the Spurs. So it's kind of like there's nothing new under the sun, but it does do my heart proud when I see articles on the right track because over the last couple of years, as I mentioned, I've gotten more despondent because more of the articles have gone the way I didn't like. There was this brief period of time in, put in quotes again, the advanced analytics movement where I thought there was a split. We might see more in the right way. Kevin Draper, who's the article I'm going to talk next, had a lot of articles about the issues with that. And I was like, maybe things will change. And they didn't. They kind of reverted back to form. And so I need those glimpses of optimism, Brian. So thank you for passing that one. I'm not even going to talk anymore about that. Last one, just wanted to give, like I said, Kevin Draper, who has done some fantastic work writing about stadiums and state spending. By the way, fuck you, Scott Walker. That's right, got me cussing on air. He apparently made hats for the Milwaukee Bucks that said "Make the Bucks Great Again." He's a Republican. He's a Trumper. This is a guy that got the state of Wisconsin to spend $500 million on a stadium. Or maybe a quarter of maybe only, this is going to sound stupid to me, maybe only $250 million. So I have to look it up. But he basically got the state to, give a bunch of money to a new stadium for the Bucks that we don't need. We're a small market. We do not need an NBA team. It's taxpayer money. We're cutting funding to things like the University of Wisconsin. So I hate Scott Walker. I hate the Bucks, not the team, not the people on them. I hate the Bucks. The billionaire owners of the Bucks getting money to fund a stadium using state money that could go to an infinite number of other things that it should. So Kevin Draper wrote a good piece about that very thing, and I believe it was for the St. Louis Blues. And what he was talking about is this consultant. I'm going to try and get his name and a few quotes up. It's the last name is Bond, and let's see, Mark Bond. So he's a Florida State University professor, but he's not an economist. This is the annoying part. I think he is a professor. Okay, so here's what he is. He is a professor at FSU's School of Hospitality, where he teaches marketing and wine tasting, and his degree is in resource development. And so this, we've noted that if you go to any economist worth their salt and ask them if cities, states, countries should fund stadiums, Olympics, etc., they all say no. They say there is nothing about that grows jobs. Even if it does, it's temporarily, right? It might create some jobs to build a stadium, but then the stadium's built, there aren't any more jobs. Even when the stadium's there and does supply jobs, they're part-time, right? That stadium isn't full not only is the stadium not full every day of the year, the stadium isn't filled to capacity every day of the year. So even if there was something every day, it's not a 19,000 audience game. It might be a small event for less. All economists basically say there is nothing about a stadium that generates revenue for cities. Even in the case where you might think, it might increase tourism, well, there are things called, like substitution, where essentially instead of going to see the Knicks play a game, I go to a restaurant. So if there's ever a market big enough to justify a stadium, that market is big enough to have enough other things that people are just going to spend their money, enough other things that are going to generate jobs, that the stadium is often at best a push, and because it costs taxpayer money, often a loss for the city. So, that's all, that's the point there. And so Kevin Draper is talking about this consultant and just pointing out the amount of bullshit that goes into these studies, because obviously this person is not qualified to do it. By the way, this is our standard point for Dave Barry and anybody else in the analytics movement. I know I stand up for him a lot, which it feels ridiculous as hell for me, Brian, to have to be just a blogger that says, you know what, that tenured professor of economics, that sports economist that was published by Stanford Press for his first major book, who has 2 published books, has just written a textbook. That's the other good news. That's why he's been writing a lot less, is he was writing an economics textbook that's going to be coming out soon, that wrote a textbook on the subject that has published over 60 academic papers. Why the hell am I saying that what he says is controversial when it's as mainstream? I could not think of a more mainstream source to get outside of sports, right? If I wasn't in the weird bubble of sports analytics, Dave Barry would be as vanilla of a person that you could get for doing sports economics. But the second he touches the advanced analytics movement, he's outside of the thing. So that feels weird. And what I'm bringing up is you've got people like this that like Mark Bond, who do economic studies, and they're not experts. They don't know what they're talking about. And what this article that Kevin Draper talks about is so great, because he even says that the St. Louis Blues, right? I wanted to say Blue Jays because that's the baseball.
That's their hockey team, yeah, the Blues.
But the Blues basically said, we don't actually like your study. Could you make it a little more realistic? And his response is to say, when asked if he could suggest using bigger numbers to get a desired result, Bond said, it's natural. I'm a consultant. So he's basically saying he's willing to tweak the numbers. When asked if being a consultant is different than being an economist, Bond responded, no, I consider myself an economics background. That's bullshit. And that's been, you're seeing me get very ramped up and excited here, Brian. It's because these type of people are what has essentially become the sports economics field, the mainstream analytics field in terms of modern day sports. You have people that aren't economists doing economic studies to explain to cities why they should spend money, even though if you asked a vanilla sports economist, they'd say no. You have people that don't know how to do regression analysis, releasing stats called dredge, and then saying that, economists who do standard regression analysis would never do. So the reason I love this article, I love it when Kevin Draper calls, people on their bullshit. I love when he points out, stadiums are a sham. Full credit. I don't know 100% if he named the title, because I know that's a common thing. If you're a writer for a mainstream site, you may not get to name the article, but he calls it Florida's go-to stadium economist, obviously not an economist, is a hack, a shill, and also not an economist. So fantastic article. And like I said, just really touched home to me because it's like, yeah, you've got a lot of people. We say that to them. You know, Dave Barry and I have talked where he'll talk to someone and say, do you have any background in statistics? Do you have any background in math? Do you have any background in economics? And they'll say, no, but I'm kind of self-taught, and it's bullshit. And when you let that happen, you get people like Mark Bond, who in this article, Kevin Draper notes, gets paid $23,000 to make a report that even the Jays or the Blue Jays, sorry. Okay, so it is the Blue Jays, sorry. The Blue Jays basically said, yeah, could you make this report a little more grounded in reality? Because this is crap.
No, this was a good article. I'm glad you linked it. I especially like that when you look at the tags at the top, it is filed to frauds in all capital letters. Deadspin has a lot of great tags on their articles. So, yeah, no, this is true. Here's the thing. I guess at this point, when I read a lot about sports and sports economics, and then also, mainstream policy and economics, mainstream policy is not based on good academic work or even trying to make a good policy. It's just whatever force is powerful enough at the time to ram it through and make it law. Stadiums are the same way, right? Whoever can make it happen, then it happens, and we're going to hire marketing guys that we say are economists to do it. So there you go.
All right, well, that is all I got. I'm ready to go to shout-outs if you don't have anything else.
Let's see. I think that's all we got. That's all we got today.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I'm actually happy. I may be in the state of Wisconsin, but I'm actually mad at the Bucks for taking my tax money. So good on Toronto for pulling out the win. Although Chicago, man, what the hell is going on? They're up by 14 in the third. You don't want to go into a 2-0 hole in the playoffs, even if you're the better seed. So I know many Boston fans are going to be pulling their hair out about what could have been if Boston had just made one move. All right, so shout-outs. I've got one. It's the Cracked is going to be doing a panel at C2E2. This is a Chicago exhibition. Basically it's a Comic-Con. I actually really love this. I went last year, got to meet Mick Foley, got to meet CM Punk, had a lot of fun. I can't go this year, so if you're able to go, you definitely should. It's fun, and the Cracked podcast, the After Hours crew is going to be there doing a couple panels. So if you're near the Chicago area, I can't shout this out enough. I love Cracked. I love C2E2, so had to definitely give that a shot.
Jimmy Butler should check it out.
Oh, yeah. Well, definitely, although I might be on the road for playoffs. I got one more shout out, actually. The Harmontown podcast. I just found this. I'm going to give it an interesting tag. So I got in a community binge. Great show. Bought the full box set, the full 6 seasons. Am killing it. And I was getting through it.
Dan Harmon is the show's creator.
So Dan Harmon created the show Community. I absolutely love the show. It's great. I was watching it. I'm getting through it, and I'm like, oh man, I'm out of content. And I found out that Dan Harmon made a podcast called Harmontown, which has 240 episodes, and I just found it. So I am super duper psyched because I'll actually give a Community reference. In Community, the character Abed loves a show called Cougar Town that only lasts 6 seasons. And he gets really depressed because he's running out of his show. But someone introduces him. They can't say it officially, but Doctor Who. I basically introduced to him the show Doctor Who, and it was like, this show's been on for 50 seasons, so it's like you're never going to run out of Doctor Who to watch because there's so much of it. So I felt the same way. I felt like Abed finding Doctor Who to find that podcast to go, I love this content, I love this material, it's about to run out, and then go, Dan Harmon's got 240 episodes of podcasts for me to listen to. I got plenty. Not to mention I haven't seen Rick and Morty yet, and I just ordered the box set there.
Oh, so you should watch that. That's a really good series.
It's 3 years. You want to know bullshit on that, Brian? Amazon has it listed as Amazon Prime, which is normally two-day delivery, but it's going to take 1 to 3 weeks for me to get it. I was debating buying the Blu-ray edition, but then I'd have to buy a Blu-ray player for my computer. Just not worth it. So I'm going to have to wait a little while to get Rick and Morty, but I got plenty of content to listen to until then. All right, I'll let you get your shout out and get out of here.
Oh yeah, real quick. Right before the show, I was tweeting to you and Arturo about Lonzo Ball versus Markelle Fultz for the #1 pick overall, and I made a new enemy on Twitter, Leonard Fairley at Len Got Game. But actually, I love it. He's saying that my point is basically I think Fultz is winning points per game versus Ball, and that's it. If Ball had more points, maybe he'd be more highly rated. He's saying no way. Points per game is not a factor in evaluations anymore. So I'm actually glad he's pointing this out. I might try to look into it more. Maybe he's right. I think he's wrong, but it's worth looking at. I mean, so Dre, I know we've written about this before, but it's been a few years. I haven't seen anyone look at it more recently. So, maybe he's right. Maybe it is changing in this direction. But anyway, I still think Ball's, like Arturo does, Ball is a better prospect than Fultz.
You should take Ball. And I mean, basically, this is the year that Los Angeles should hope they get the number 2 pick and pick right. Because the last couple of seasons, they've had the number 2 pick, and the number 1, 2 have been, for the injuries to him, Ben Simmons was still the much better play this year. They've kind of gotten unlucky, I put that in quotes, getting the number 2 pick the last couple of seasons. So if there is a season for the Lakers to hope for the number 2 pick, this is definitely it.
And to get into a little more nuance here real fast, he may just be saying that decision makers, they don't actually use points per game outright consciously. And maybe I can get on board with that, but subconsciously, I think it's still really driving everyone. And I think subconsciously, that's a big reason why Ball is not considered to be the overall pick, considering his efficiency numbers and counting numbers are just off the charts. So
too much of what I see in sports analytics is I know this to be true. Now get me the numbers to prove it, as opposed to say, do an experiment to tell me if this player is good or if this is the right move. So I think that's still the case with the draft. I think teams have already convinced themselves who they like. And if they've got an analytics squad, they're not asking the analytics squad who is the best player. They're saying, get me numbers to show me why Fultz is better than Ball.
And let's point out the real truth about the draft real fast before we get out of here. There's probably going to be 0, 1, maybe 2 good players in the whole draft. So probably both of them are going to be bad. And we're really just talking about a few percentage points difference in who you should decide to pick. It's a crapshoot. Maybe both these guys will be good. Maybe they won't.
Yeah, kept us going longer. But just to be clear, what Brian means here is young players are not typically good out of the gate. Even players like LeBron James and Kevin Durant, who became MVPs, were not good their rookie seasons for an NBA player. They were good for rookies, not good for NBA. Well, actually, no, Kevin Durant was terrible for a rookie too. They were not good NBA players their rookie season. So you should not expect a young player, a rookie, to be good out of the gate. And even then, there are only going to be a couple good players from this draft. So basically all Brian's doing is betting on the house. Brian's saying it's better than even money that the field, right, is going to be better than these 2 players. We don't know. All right, Well, that's been our show. You can find us at boxscoregeeks.com. If you found us at boxscoregeeks.com, you can also find us on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geeks Show. I messed up my normal outro tag. Sorry about that, Brian. We go live every week, usually Tuesday or Wednesday at twitch.tv/nerd numbers. We've just been mixing it up the last couple of weeks, so you'll just have to figure it out. Follow us on Twitter. Myself, Nerd Numbers, Brian Foster, Boxscore Brian, or Patrick Minton, NBA Geek. Follow any of us on Twitter to find out when we're going live, even though we didn't tell you today, so I'm just lying to you. Sorry about that. Anyway, we'll be back next week, and hope you had a good night.